Welcome to the Becoming Body Smart podcast, where we unlock the secrets of sustainable health and fitness and help you master your health habits. If you're tired of quick fixes, generic blueprints, and chasing short-term results, you're in the right place. It's time to become Body Smart.
So here we go. 7 types of rest. So rest is such an important part of being able to accomplish our goals, feeling healthy and doing well in our lives. If we're not rested, then we won't have the energy that we need. We've talked before about how much things are not necessarily about how much time we have. It's about how much energy we have to give to the things that we really care about. And so just having it be a time thing, because we always complain about that, I just don't have enough time. But often it's more of an energy crisis than a time crisis. And often taking some of that time to recharge our batteries and really rest gives us the energy that we need to be able to do what we need to do. And we talked about that before, about like, make sure you're doing self-care and things, but what does that mean? What can that look like? What types of battery recharging activities, and what are the categories of those things? What does that all really look like? We're going to dive into that today. So we're introducing the 7 types of rest. And we stole this from somebody else. Actually, the idea came from a YouTuber, ABI Bomeda, at For Good Code on Instagram. He kind of set up this outline, and we really liked it. So we're stealing it from him, but had to give him credit. Any opening thoughts, Mark?
Yes. So with these different types of rest, I think it's important to remember that all of them play into one another, right? Same thing as we talk about with all the different forms of health. When we make a deposit in any of these areas, it's going to affect all the areas, right? When we get good physical rest, it's going to help our social interactions. When we have mental rest, right, we're going to feel less physically drained. And so just understanding as we do all these things, they all support one another, and all interact.
Yeah, agreed. They all connect. And there's a lot of overlap between the ways to do all of these things, right? The ways to kind of get rest in those areas. So let's start going through it. So physical rest is kind of the most obvious, but often when you think of physical rest, you think of just laying down and sitting there and taking a nap, which is good. That can be good. But I would say active physical rest is very important. So not just sitting down and Netflixing and chilling, or not just sitting or laying down and being on your phone and checking out, is maybe a little bit different than actually actively taking physical rest. So that can be things like movement snacks, or actually taking a nap versus just kind of laying down. Because if we're just laying down and kind of like Netflixing and chilling or whatever, that actually still uses mental energy, still keeps our brain kind of wired, by keeping it engaged, by having the glowing screen in front of your face, all those types of things. So it's actively like choosing to physically rest or to do a low intensity activity that helps recharge the batteries there. Any physical comments before we bounce into mental?
Yeah, so I like that idea of physical rest being actually active. It's actually like sometimes our bodies actually need a break, need a rest from just sitting around, which is kind of a different way to think about it, right? Because like Cameron said, usually we think of it as like not doing something, but actually like moving our body can be restful, because our bodies are built to move, right? They like to move. And so getting those regular movement snacks like Cameron talked about can be really beneficial, not only for keeping our energy up, but again, like it affects our mental rest. Often when we're just in front of a screen for a long time, right, we kind of end up zoning out. And so being able to get our mind off of that, get our mind out of focus mode for a little bit, we can actually get better at solving problems. So while we're exercising or playing or doing something like that, like our mind can still be working on problems in the background. And so when we come back to that task, we're actually better prepared to meet the challenge. And so, um, yeah. And then obviously just the sleep part, right? Getting 8 hours of sleep a night, of quality sleep a night, really impacts everything the next day and really affects our energy levels. The one thing I'd say with naps is trying to keep them like under 30 minutes. Those tend to be refreshing. When we go longer than that, we can kind of mess with our sleep schedule. So over the day, we build up what's called sleep pressure. And so when we take naps that are too long, it releases a little bit too much of that pressure and can make it harder to get to sleep at night, versus those shorter naps can actually be mentally refreshing as well. And so just keeping that in mind for the physical rest.
Yeah, it's just keeping a good balance. So that leads right into mental rest, right? Which are things like turning off your phone, staying off social media or other things. It's usually phones and screens helps us avoid, or be able to mentally rest, and then getting somewhere where we can like really check out. So meditation, uh, going for a walk in the woods, things like that. Other thoughts there, Mark, on mental rest?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think back to my dad when he was like my age. And so my dad grew up in the 50s and 60s. And obviously then there were no cell phones, right? There were newspapers, but no social media, no internet. And and so when you were done with work, you were essentially done with work, right? um, they had, when he was a little bit older, they got TV, but just had a radio for the first little bit. And so just it, in the past, we weren't so immersed in a world of constant information. I can't remember
Connectedness, right?
and
Like
connect.
always connected. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so, every generation has its own issues for sure. But I think that was one of the things that was a little bit different, right? Like you just were able to be disconnected a little bit more. It was harder to be reachable, and and so recognizing that and making space for that, right? Like maybe you, Cameron and I both have like phone lock boxes that we should both probably use more. So things like that. But I can't remember the writer of the book, but there's a book called The Information Diet, right? And basically it talks about how we are in a world of information overload. And the problem now isn't enough access to information, right? It used to be you'd have to go, buy one of those like the World Book or the big encyclopedias, right? That were already out of date by the time they were printed. And so, in years past, it really was an information access problem, but now it's not, right? There's so much information. There's so much data at our fingertips. And so thinking of it like that, right? An information diet, being thoughtful about what you're consuming, how you're consuming it, when you're consuming it, and how often, and regulating that a little bit more, because our minds do need a break. And sometimes it feels like, no, I think in a world that's so connected in this way, we like there's definitely more anxiety attached to that, right? Like I've always got to be on, or I'm going to miss the next thing, right? This kind of built-in sense of the fear of missing out, right? The built-in FOMO to the way that our lives are kind of organized now. And so I think that can create anxiety, that can create uncertainty. And one of our go-to things for dealing with uncertainty is more information, right? I need more information. But more information doesn't always help us make better decisions. Um, there was
Right.
oh, go ahead.
Well, I just think, yeah, sometimes more information. So you start looking up, like you see everybody going on vacation. And so then you start looking up vacations. And the more information, it's like, oh, we couldn't afford to go there. And then you start looking it up. And then you find one that's way cheaper than the other ones. And it's like, oh, but this one's such a good deal. And so let's do that one. And it's like, wait, you couldn't afford any of them. can you actually afford this? But it's such a good deal, right? I love the phrase like you have to spend a lot to save a lot. Um, and I get caught in this all the time. I love a good deal, but uh, it's just that idea that we're always on, we're always connected, and so sometimes when you see enough of something, it becomes the norm. It becomes like you know, we get brainwashed to thinking that that's a normal thing or that we should be doing that. And that's, I think, one of the dangers of social media because well, and all of these kind of other types of rest, they all overlap quite a bit. But I think that it's not just a mental thing; it's an emotional and sensory thing and social thing. Like you do get that FOMO, and it hits on several of these areas of rest, being connected so much like that. It makes things normal that maybe aren't necessarily normal or definitely not necessary.
Yeah. So I want to read this little quote, and then we'll scoot on to the other ones because we're running low on time. But I really like this.
Yeah.
They said, "We have thousands of times more available information than Thomas Jefferson or Abraham Lincoln. Yet which of us would think ourselves 1,000 times more educated or more serviceable to our fellow men than they?" The sublime quality of what they gave us, including the Declaration of Independence and the Gettysburg Address, was not attributable to their great resources of information, for their libraries were comparatively small by our standards. Theirs was the wise and inspired use of a limited amount of information. Available information widely used is far more valuable than multiplied information allowed to lie fallow. And so I liked that take on it, right? Of it's kind of the great ideas and great people from the past had much less access to the type of information and the type of media that we do. But that didn't keep them from being effective in their domains. And so recognizing that we do need rest, that we do need to limit at times that what information that we're taking in and just take a break, right? Get out in nature, get out with people you love and take a break in that way.
Yeah. Well, and so that's there, like I said, there's a lot of overlap between the different types of rest. So like emotional rest, sensory rest, and a lot of these things, the ways to do that, to recharge in those ways, there's a lot of overlap. So emotional rest is essentially, giving yourself a break from those things that are overwhelming or emotional to you, right? That stress, anger, fear, so many other emotions. It's those things that trigger those thoughts and feelings. It's taking a break from those in some way to rest up. Because some of those things we are just a normal part of living, but it's good to take some break from that. So spending time alone, spending time in nature, journaling, what else? Talking to a friend, just kind of taking that time to check out, not emotionally necessarily, but being able to have time to process those emotions and those feelings, which again I think has a ton of overlap with so many of the other ways, spiritual and sensory and creative and things. Because a lot of the recommendations or things that you would do for, like sensory rest, for example, the next one on the list, um, is doing things where you avoid the bombardment of TV, social media, all those things, and it's spending time in a quiet room, all of those things that hit your senses. So turn off the TV, close your eyes, spend time in a quiet room, take a bath, listen to calming music, practice deep breathing. All of those things are ways that you could potentially use to help mentally, emotionally, or physically rest as well. Um, so there is a lot of overlap, but eliminating those things that stimulate your senses will give you a lot of mental rest as well, and often some emotional rest.
Well, it's funny because you don't think about that one as much, right? Like, I don't like, oh yeah, have I been seeing too much or hearing too much today? But really, like our brain processes a ton of information and it does it so well. But if you think about like all the information that's constantly coming into us, right, in the forms of sight and sounds and smell and our other senses, like that's a lot of data. And our brain has to parse through that and filter out the noise, right? Filter out what's not relevant. And so what we perceive is only a fraction of the actual sense data that's coming into us constantly. And so having moments like that, I think are really helpful. Another principle I think is really helpful with all of these, and this is something that I struggle with, is feeling like I don't have the time to implement. But recognizing that sometimes, like one, it doesn't always take a ton of time, right? Can I journal for 5 minutes? Can I sit in a quiet, dark room for 5 minutes, right? Just even like a little emotional snack break can be really beneficial. And also recognizing like what are things that tend to like bring the pressure up, and in those breaks give us a little bit more ability to be present and to show up in the way that we want. So a great example is actually last night. I was just feeling like some stress, some anxiety. Had my son with me, and like I could feel myself like getting less engaged. And so what I recognize is like I just need to prepare for tomorrow, right? So clean up some things around the house, like got my lunch ready, got my clothes set out, and it took maybe 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes for all of the stuff to just get done. And like that was enough to kind of bring down the stress level, right? To rest, if you will. And then I was able to be much more present and engaged with my son. And so recognizing that when we take rest, sometimes it feels like we don't have the time to, right? Take those little moments to recharge. But when we do, right, when we just take those little bits of time, it can really make a huge impact. And it doesn't always take a ton of time, right? 15, 20 minutes, sometimes even just 5 minutes, except to take a break, to do something different, to rest can up our energy and help us to re-engage.
Yeah, I think that's such a great example because even though it was an active form of resting, it allowed your mind to get off the Monday morning dread, right? Because that's what that
Yeah.
was, right?
Oh yeah. Oh
Is
yeah,
that
absolutely.
Monday morning dread. You're like, oh, what do I have tomorrow? I'd rather stay on vacation for the rest of my life. That kind of feeling.
Actually.
Um, and so, yeah, as that feeling's building up, you're going, okay, what?
The Sunday scary, as someone called it.
Yeah, yeah. When it's pretty natural. I think we all feel that, especially coming off of vacation. It's like, the mattress feels pretty good Monday morning early. But I like that you took an active rest approach to it. And I think that's the key to a lot of these things. So with creative rest, that's one of the things that I found really interesting, that all of the suggestions weren't necessarily like restful things. So take a break from work was the first one, but pursue a hobby, engage in creative activity like painting, knitting, crafting, whatever, cooking, whatever it is for you. But it's more of an active thing where you participate in something creative to allow your brain to explore and be creative is a way to kind of rest the forced creativity, like at work where you have to come up with something, um, and where you're kind of forced to try to think out of the box, or whatever, versus actually just taking time to let your mind wander in an activity that you enjoy doing. um, I love that, but they're active rest things, just like Mark took an active rest to avoid those stressors by tackling them head on for a brief moment, but then it allowed him to rest from it. So I think that's awesome. Those types of active ways of getting that rest. So with the social rest, again, a lot of these things are more active. So it's doing things by yourself sometimes, just because social things can be draining, can be physically, emotionally draining. So over the weekend, I was at a cabin, and it's a big cabin, but still, like 40 people in one cabin is tight space, and you're crawling all over each other, and it's loud. It gets so loud at times. Um, and so sometimes you just need time. I walked out into the garage, and my brother-in-law was there listening to music, just sitting by himself, working on his fishing rod and reel, and just kind of spending time. And I was like, it gets pretty loud in there. He's like, yeah, it gets really loud in there. So that was his way of just checking out a little bit, and like taking some time by himself. where he could kind of avoid the heightened anxiety and stress level of being around all that noise. So, avoiding social situations can sometimes be a good thing if we need a break there. Spend time with close friends and family in smaller chunks, in smaller groups. Solo picnic or hike or activity, just take yourself out to lunch. Things like that can help build that social rest, give you a break from that and having to be on, right? Shannon talks about that, how with certain people you feel like you always have to be on, and with others you can kind of be yourself more. So taking time to be with people or be with yourself where you don't have to be on can be a way that you can get some rest there socially.
Well, a great example of that for me was again, like everyone here for Thanksgiving, and we just been kind of like sitting around stuffing ourselves with food, which was great in so many ways. But one of the days I was just feeling kind of icky, so I just like in the middle of doing stuff, I just went and put on some running clothes and went out for half an hour,
Yeah.
and it was great. Again, one, like it was some social rest, but two, it actually ended up being physically restful. Like I felt more energized after having done that, because I'd been like sitting for most of the day, right? And I was actually like, I was less tired after I ran than I was before, and was able to again just like have more energy for the rest of the day. And so that's the wild thing. Sometimes, we just are sitting around, we start to feel sleepy, right? And we're like, oh, I could take a nap. And sometimes that is what we need, right? We need that form of rest. But other times, like we find if we just get up and we're active and we do something, it can actually be very restful as well. And I think in that social aspect, recognizing kind of what your tendencies are, right? There's some people that actually does energizing them, does energize them, right? Being with people is like what their nervous system needs, to help regulate itself. And so for some, it's like, hey, being out and doing a social event is actually restful for me, right? It's energizing. And so, and for other people, right, myself included, is like that small groups or even some alone time, um,
Yep.
and can be helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, that some people get energized by groups and other people do not. And so recognize what energizes you versus depletes you. Yeah, I think that's important. Which leads into spiritual rest. What energizes you and depletes you there? So I think this is more important than we often realize. But doing active things, most of these things are active things, but that allow you to be able to recharge the batteries spiritually. So a lot of the suggestions are engage in a spiritual practice that you enjoy, pray, meditate, spend time in nature, practice yoga, or other kind of mindfulness activities. And my favorite one, actually, I think, is volunteer in a cause that you care about. I think when you actively do something to engage that way, that really does recharge the spiritual batteries in a big way. I think the other things like prayer and meditation and study or things like that can really do a good job as well, but often feel like tasks or obligations at times. And so sometimes just focusing on others instead of yourself can be recharging quite a bit. Sometimes that can feel overwhelming, and you may need a break from that as well. So just kind of monitor that you don't overcommit yourself to the point that it's actually depleting and draining, to the point that it's shutting your desire and drive to help others down. That can happen where we kind of take on too much there. But I think volunteerism can be really, really huge in terms of connecting with other people and connecting with your kind of deeper self. So love that suggestion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just one last comment. I know we're over time on that spiritual aspect is what you said about being active, right? I think the thing to remember is contrary to what Descartes might have come to, right? We're not just brains, right? We're not just thinking things. We are feeling, embodied people, right? Our brain is connected to a body, and so taking things in, right, through our senses and acting things out through our body really does help to regulate our nervous system, right? It is beneficial for us, whatever that looks like, right? Whether it's things like Cameron said, right? Being out in nature or meditating or being volunteering for different causes that you're passionate about, or where it's more of that religious bent, right? Of prayer or scripture reading or meditation in those forms. All of those can be extremely beneficial for us. And it goes back to several months ago, Cameron's favorite new word, right? Our talk on ikigai, right? What's your purpose? What's your why?
Yeah.
And having something that you're deeply connected to and passionate about that's outside of yourself, right? That's connected to more than something else, but that's connected to that greater purpose, to that greater community of people, can be really beneficial and tends to be very restful as well. And again, another practice that helps regulate our nervous system.
Yeah, I love it. It's all of those things. It's interesting how taking active rest just is so important, that you're actively doing something to rest, which sounds counterintuitive, but really is important, and winds up being much more important than we think. And we often we haven't really had time, because we were trying to cover all the 7 areas, to talk about like how we often feel as though that's selfish to take me time or things like that. We've addressed that before, but the more we do kind of self-care type things, the more it recharges our batteries, which is awesome, but the more it allows us to be present and be there. Mark's example of being able to be more there with Liam, once he kind of took care of those feelings and thoughts that he was having, allowed him to be actually more present and more capable in those situations than if he had just kind of tried to push through. I think of self-care items is akin to pushing through pain when you're running, right? There's an acceptable limit, but we don't push through the pain. Otherwise, injury happens. And I think the same thing is true in our kind of mental, emotional, world, in resting from things and stuff like that, in all of these areas, that if we push through them, we'll often get injured, get hurt in some way, shape, or form. And so taking adequate rest is so important in recharging those batteries and being able to really give what you've got to those that you love and the things that you really care about. So, those are our 7 types of rest that I think was brilliant. Again, from For Good Code on Instagram was the one that kind of inspired those, but great stuff. So we've got the call again tomorrow evening. Looking forward to it. Any final thoughts, Mark?
That's all, folks.
That's all, folks. All right, we'll see you then.
Thanks for listening to the Becoming Body Smart podcast. If you have questions, thoughts, or want to continue the conversation, reach out to us on our socials or join our community. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It helps us bring you even more valuable content. Remember, sustainable health is a lifelong journey, and we're here to support you every step of the way. Live longer, live stronger, and become body smart.